My name is Naomi Bell. I'm 37 years old, and last 4th of July, my younger sister stood on my parents' back deck, lifted a champagne flute in front of 32 relatives, and called me the family charity case who never figured her life out. My mother smiled. My father looked down at his plate, and I raised my glass of sweet tea and said 12 words that made the whole yard go dead still. Then stop spending Dad's surgery money on your leased Range Rover, Erica. No one clapped after that. No one laughed either. My sister's mouth fell open. My mother turned white. And my father, who had ignored me for most of that summer, finally looked directly at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. But that moment didn't start on the deck. It started 6 months earlier at 7-Eleven on a rainy January morning, with a fraud alert on my phone, a coffee I never got to finish, and a manila folder I kept hidden in my closet until Independence Day. By the time my family finally saw what was inside that folder, 3 people cried. 1 person begged. 1 person tried to run, and none of them was me. If you've ever had to sit quietly while somebody else rewrote the truth about your life, tap the like button, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Back to January. Back to the morning I learned my sister wasn't just lying. She was building her entire life out of money that was never hers to touch. It was 7:11 a.m. on a Tuesday, and rain was ticking against the kitchen window over my sink in a soft, patient rhythm. The kind of rain that makes the whole world look undecided. I was standing barefoot in my apartment in Asheville, stirring instant oatmeal I didn't even want, when my phone buzzed across the counter. I almost ignored it. I wish I had. The alert came from a small medical recovery account I managed for my parents. Not legally mine. Not truly theirs either. It had been set up after my father's heart surgery consult the previous summer. Money moved aside quietly, intentionally, for whatever might come next. Tests, specialists, travel, recovery. The account was supposed to sit untouched unless my parents needed it. Instead, I was staring at a flagged transfer for $6,800. Destination: Blue Veil Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of Blue Veil Holdings. I read the notification twice, then a third time. My first thought was that it was a mistake. My second thought was Erica. That was the problem with having a sister like mine. You stopped asking whether she had done something wrong. You started asking how long she had been doing it before anybody noticed. I opened the banking app and felt the blood leave my face. There had been 7 transfers in 11 months. Not one huge enough to trigger panic. All of them small enough to look administrative. Consulting, vehicle servicing, property management, temporary reimbursement. That was Erica's style. She never smashed doors. She came in through side windows and called it airflow. I turned the stove off without remembering doing it. The oatmeal sat there thickening in the pot. The rain kept tapping the glass, and I stood in my tiny kitchen wearing old gray socks, staring at numbers that had not accidentally arranged themselves into betrayal. That morning, I called exactly 1 person. Not my mother, not my father, and definitely not Erica. I called Judith Cole. Judith had handled paperwork for my family on and off for more than 2 decades. Not flashy, not warm, not sentimental. She was 66, precise, and had the kind of voice that made lies feel embarrassed. When she picked up, I said, "Judith, I think something is wrong." She was quiet for half a second. Then she said, "Come by at 2 o'clock. Bring screenshots." "And Naomi?" "Yes." "Do not discuss this with your sister before I see the numbers." That was the first moment I understood this might be real. Not family drama, not another episode in the long-running production of Erica Bell Sloan. Misunderstood heroine. Something colder than that. Something documented. Judith's office sat above a hardware store on a street that still looked like 1998 if you squinted. The stairs smelled faintly like dust and printer toner. Her waiting room had 1 fake ficus tree and 3 magazines so old, one of them still had a story about home fax machines. I arrived at 1:52. She was already waiting with her glasses low on her nose and a yellow legal pad in front of her. I handed her the screenshots. She read them in silence. Then she stood, crossed the room to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder with my parents' last name on it, and came back without saying a word. The room felt smaller after that. Judith compared a few printed pages. She underlined something. She turned another page. Then she looked up at me over the top of her glasses and said the sentence that split my year in half. "Your sister has access she should not have." I didn't answer. Not because I was stunned, because part of me had been expecting exactly that. "What kind of access?" I asked. Judith tapped the page. "Limited financial discretion was added to a support authorization last June." "What support authorization?" "The one your mother signed to allow account management while your father was in and out of cardiac review." I felt heat rise behind my eyes. "My mother would never agree to that." Judith gave me a long look. "Your mother may not understand what she signed. Those are two different things." Then she slid the paper across the desk. It was a photocopy. There, in dense legal language, was a paragraph granting temporary asset flexibility for healthcare-related financial coordination. It sounded harmless, until you noticed the added line about discretionary movement between accounts. A line Judith said had not been in the original draft she prepared. I looked up slowly. "You're saying it was changed?" "I'm saying," Judith replied, "that I made one version and the bank processed another." That was the moment the room changed. Up until then, I still thought I might be dealing with carelessness. Maybe Erica had overstepped. Maybe my mother had been gullible. Maybe some assistant at a bank had filed the wrong page. But when Judith said there were two versions, I understood this for what it was. Not sloppiness, not confusion. Design. I asked, "Can you prove it?" Judith folded her hands. "I can help you build proof. But Naomi, if you start this, you need to finish it." Outside the office window, someone was backing a pickup truck into a narrow parking spot and cursing softly. I remember that because it sounded so normal, and nothing felt normal anymore. "I'll finish it," I said. Judith nodded once. "Then we do this quietly." My sister Erica was 34, beautiful in the polished, expensive way that makes strangers assume competence. Blonde hair that never frizzed, teeth that looked insured, clothes that looked effortless but never were. She lived 20 minutes from my parents in a stone front subdivision with an HOA, a 3-car driveway, and exactly 0 things she fully owned. Her husband, Nolan, sold commercial flooring and wore stress like an undershirt. My parents adored her. That had always been true. Erica was sparkle. I was usefulness. She arrived. I prepared. She was introduced first. I was remembered later. It had been like that since middle school. When we were kids, Erica learned early that if she cried prettily enough, adults rushed to solve the version of events she described. I learned that if I wanted the full story heard, I had to bring receipts. So I started a folder. A plain manila folder. No label on the outside. Inside, I placed screenshots, dated notes, printed statements, and a running timeline in my own handwriting. I kept it on the top shelf of my bedroom closet behind winter blankets and a shoebox full of photographs. I did not tell anyone I had it, not even my brother, especially not my mother. And over the next 5 months, that folder gained weight. So did I. Not on a scale. In my face. In the way I entered rooms. In the way I stopped volunteering softness for people who only ever used it against me. By February, Judith had traced enough movement to give shape to the damage. The surgery fund had been touched repeatedly. So had a secondary savings account my parents thought was inactive. There were auto payments tied to a luxury lease, transfers to Blue Veil Holdings, a credit consolidation service in Atlanta, and one transaction that made Judith take off her glasses and rub the bridge of her nose. A designer furniture invoice for just under $4,000. My father had been comparing prices on generic prescription plans while my sister was buying imported dining chairs. I sat across from Judith in silence for a long time after that. Finally I asked, "Does my mother know?" Judith's expression did not change. "Know what, specifically?" "That Erica is using their money." "No." "That it's this much?" "No." That the authorization was altered? Judith paused. I sincerely doubt it. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above us. I wasn't shocked that Erica had done it. I was shocked by the scale, and by the discipline. This wasn't a shopping spree. It was a system, a slow siphon, a patient rearranging of reality until the money started to feel like an extension of her own hand. You need an ally inside the family, Judith said. I thought immediately of one person. Aunt Lorraine, my father's younger sister, the only adult in my childhood who ever seemed to notice things before they became disasters. She wore flat shoes, spoke rarely, and missed nothing. I drove to her house the next morning with a grocery bag full of muffins I didn't bake and nerves I couldn't hide. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in. I'll make tea." I told her enough to matter. Not everything. Just the outline, the altered authorization, the account movement, Judith's concern. Aunt Lorraine sat at her kitchen table with both hands around her mug while I spoke. When I finished, she said, "I warned your mother last fall." The sentence landed so hard I almost missed the rest. About what? About Erica carrying too much debt and too much pride at the same time. That combination rots people. I blinked. You told Mom? She said I was being dramatic. Of course she did. My mother only believed warnings that came in polished packaging. Lorraine went on. I also told your father he needed to look at his statements himself. He said Erica was helping and that everybody should be grateful one daughter had a head for modern life. That was my father exactly. He distrusted everything he didn't understand and then handed it to the prettiest person in the room. What do I do? I asked. Lorraine looked at me for a long moment. Count quietly, then speak once. That became the rule of my spring. Count quietly, speak once. In March, my brother Kevin Evan called from Denver. He hadn't been home in almost 3 years. He worked in logistics, lived in a condo with too many windows, and had perfected the family skill of staying just distant enough to avoid getting assigned a role. He said Mom had called him crying. About me. Apparently I was obsessed with money, threatening Erica, and trying to insert myself into things I didn't understand. I laughed when he said that. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes the only alternative is throwing your phone into a river. Naomi, he said carefully, is any of this true? Some of it, I replied. Long silence. Then, which part? The part where I understand it better than they do. He exhaled. Erica asked me in January to co-sign a business line. I sat up straighter. For what? She called it a short-term bridge while Nolan moved commissions around. Did you sign? No. Do you have the messages? Another pause. Yes. Send them. He did. There were 9 of them. Long paragraphs from Erica about family loyalty, temporary stress, how real siblings show up, how she'd always protected the family image while some people just stood around judging. The last message said, "Don't be like Naomi. Don't make me carry all of this alone." That line made me colder than I expected. Not because it hurt, because it was useful. People like Erica tell the truth in threats before they tell it anywhere else. I printed the messages and added them to the folder. New tab. Evan, January. At the bottom of the page, I wrote one sentence. She is widening the circle. April brought Easter at my parents' house. I almost didn't go. But avoiding your family when you know something they don't only works for so long. Sooner or later, silence starts to look like consent. So I wore a blue dress my mother once called severe, brought deviled eggs nobody thanked me for, and drove out to the house where I learned most of my worst lessons. My sister's new Range Rover was in the driveway, white, glossy, smug. My father was out back at the grill, pressing burgers with a metal spatula like he could flatten disappointment into obedience. My mother was arranging tulips in a pitcher vase and talking loudly enough for everyone to hear about Erica's crazy busy month. Erica herself was standing by the island describing a hard but beautiful season in her marriage while wearing earrings that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. She saw me and smiled. Not warmly, triumphantly, like she had already heard my version of the story and decided it did not matter. That day, I watched my mother admire my sister's car. I watched my father ask Nolan whether the lease terms were favorable. I watched Erica say, "We made it happen." And I said nothing. Not because I was weak, because I was still counting. Later, in the hallway outside the powder room, I overheard my mother telling a cousin, "Naomi means well, but she's always had a chip on her shoulder about Erica. Some women just don't bloom the same." I stood there holding a dish towel in both hands so tightly my knuckles hurt. Some women just don't bloom the same. That sentence stayed with me. It stayed with me when I drove home. It stayed with me when I printed another statement. It stayed with me when Judith confirmed the car lease payment was being auto-drafted from a card connected to one of the consolidated balances. And it stayed with me all the way to July, because sometimes one sentence explains an entire family. One child blooms, the other keeps the house from burning down. In mid-May, Aunt Lorraine told me something I had never known. We met at a diner off Highway 9 where the coffee tasted like old pennies and nobody rushed anybody out. The waitress called everyone Harn. Lorraine stirred too much sugar into her tea and said, "There's something your grandmother did before she died." I looked up. My grandmother had been the one person in my family who saw me clearly. Not kindly all the time, but clearly. "When your father was restructuring the family properties," Lorraine said, "your mother wanted everything to flow eventually toward Erica." That did not surprise me. What did Grandma do? "She created a contingency oversight note. Judith has it." I frowned. "A what?" "A private instruction. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just a line of authority saying if she ever believed financial stewardship had become unsafe, Judith was to consult you first." I just stared at her. My grandmother had done that? For me? Lorraine nodded. "She told me once, Naomi is not the easiest granddaughter, but she is the one I'd trust with my last envelope." For a second I couldn't speak. It wasn't the instruction that got me. It was the recognition. Being known that exactly by one person can sustain you for years. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because your mother would have called it favoritism. Lorraine reached across the table and touched the back of my hand once. "You were not crazy, Naomi. You were early." I went to my car afterward and cried for exactly 3 minutes. Not about Erica, not even about my parents. About my grandmother, who had been dead 9 years and still somehow managed to hand me a lantern in the dark. By June, the family group chat was becoming unbearable. Photos of patio furniture, vacation countdowns, recipes, flags. My mother posting things like, "Nothing better than family under one roof this July." My sister replying with heart emojis and words like, "blessed." Then, one Sunday afternoon, the message came that changed the timetable. It was from my father. 3 words. "Need your help." That alone was enough to tighten my chest. My father never asked me for help in texts. When I called, his voice sounded wrong, lower, careful. He said he'd gone into the home office looking for the envelope where he kept old bearer bonds and a cashier's check tied to house repairs. The envelope was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. He had asked my mother. She said Erica had been organizing paperwork earlier in the week. I closed my eyes. "How much?" I asked. "About 12,000. I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Dad, listen to me. Don't confront anyone. Don't move anything else. Don't tell Mom what you suspect yet. I'm coming tomorrow." There was a long silence. Then he said something I will never forget. "I should have listened to you before I knew I needed to." That one hurt. Because it was both an apology and a confession. And because it came years too late. Still, I took it. You take late truth when early truth was refused. The next morning, I drove out before sunrise with the folder in a reusable grocery bag on the passenger seat. The roads were empty. Fog sat low over the fields. I remember passing a church sign that said, "What is done in the dark will come to light," and almost laughing at how unsubtle the universe can be when it wants your attention. I arrived at my parents' house at 8:10. I had my old side door key. I let myself in quietly. The house was not quiet. There was movement in my father's office. A drawer closing, paper shifting. I walked down the hall and stopped at the doorway. Erica was inside, standing at the desk, one hand on a lockbox, the other holding a stack of envelopes. She turned when she heard me, and I watched the exact moment calculation replaced surprise on her face. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I set the grocery bag on the floor. "I could ask you the same thing. Mom asked me to organize." "No," I said. "Mom asked you because she still doesn't know what you are." That landed. Her chin lifted half an inch. "You always did love drama." I walked into the room, took the envelopes from her hand, and set them on the desk behind me. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it in front of her. Not aggressively, not theatrically, just flat on the desk between us. "What's that?" she asked. "The last chance I'm giving you to stop lying before everyone else gets here." Her face changed then, not into guilt, into irritation, as if I had become inconvenient in a way she no longer found manageable. "Naomi, whatever Judith told you," I held up one hand. "Don't insult me by pretending this came from Judith. It came from statements, signatures, transfers, texts, lease records, and a fake clause inserted into a document my mother did not understand." For the first time all year, Erica looked uncertain. Just for a second. Then she recovered. "You can't prove intent." That line told me everything. Not I didn't do it. Not you're wrong. Not how could you think this. You can't prove intent. People always tell on themselves in the grammar they choose under pressure. I said, "Read the folder. I'm not participating in your little trial. You've got 1 hour before it becomes a public one." I left her there with the folder unopened on the desk and went to the kitchen. I put coffee on, set out mugs, opened the blinds. The sky was brightening over the backyard, and through the quiet of that house, I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of a manila folder being opened. The family meeting had originally been framed by my mother as a misunderstanding session. That was her phrase, a misunderstanding session, as if forged paperwork, siphoned funds, missing bonds, and manipulated siblings were all just unfortunate weather conditions. By 10:30, people began arriving. My brother Evan came in first from the airport rental counter and hugged me longer than he ever had in adulthood. Aunt Lorraine arrived next with her jaw set and a pie nobody touched. Judith came at 10:45 carrying a slim black case that held certified copies, revocation forms, notarized statements, and enough calm to anchor a ship. My father was already seated at the dining table when I came in from the porch. My mother stood near the kitchen island arranging pastries she had bought and transferred to her own serving tray. A small act of image control, one of her specialties. Nolan arrived last, alone. He walked in looking tired and wary, and kept glancing between Erica and the rest of us as if he had entered the wrong church. My sister came down the hallway in a cream sweater set and soft makeup, like grief's well-dressed cousin. She took her seat beside my mother. I stood at the end of the table and placed 3 folders in front of the people who needed them most. One for my parents, one for Evan, one master copy for the table. Then I sat. My mother looked around and said, with that brittle, false brightness I knew so well, "Well, let's just clear the air and be kind." Judith said nothing. Aunt Lorraine folded her hands. My father looked at me. "Start," he said. So I did. I did not start with emotion. That was the mistake my family expected from me. They thought if they pushed me hard enough, I would become angry, tearful, imprecise. Instead, I became chronological. I opened the folder and began with January. This is the medical recovery account created after Dad's cardiac consultations. These are the 7 transfers flagged over 11 months. These are the lease-linked withdrawals. These are the routing details for Blue Veil Holdings, LLC. My mother frowned at the page. My father adjusted his glasses. Erica shifted in her chair. I kept going. This is the version of the support authorization Judith drafted. This is the version processed by the bank. This paragraph, I touched the line with one finger, does not exist on the original. Judith slid both certified copies forward. My mother leaned in closer. She read the line twice. Then she looked up at Judith. This isn't what I signed. No, Judith said evenly. It is not. The room changed temperature. You could feel it. My father's mouth tightened. My mother's fingers started trembling against the paper. Erica made her first move. Mom, she's twisting this. You know how Naomi gets when she thinks. Quiet, my father said. Not loudly, not with drama, but with more force than I had heard in his voice in years. Erica went still. I turned to the next section. These are the text messages sent to Evan asking him to co-sign a business line. These are references to needing family to cover the bridge and not be like Naomi. These are from your phone, Erica. My brother didn't look at her when he spoke. He just said, I told you no in February because I thought something was wrong. Erica stared at him like betrayal had no right to arrive from a sibling she considered decorative. Then I laid out the final pages. The lease abstraction. The debt consolidation summary, the registered business record for Blue Veil Holdings, and the missing bond notation my father had called me about 4 days earlier. My father read in silence for a long time. He had always been a slow reader, deliberate, stubborn. Each page got a full hearing from him. When he finished, he put both hands flat on the table. Then he looked at Erica and asked the only question that mattered. How much? Erica started crying immediately. But not elegantly, not the polished, noble crying she used at holidays. This was messy, uneven, angry. I was going to fix it, she said. How much? He asked again. Judith answered for her. Just over 211,000, not including indirect liabilities. My mother made a sound then, small, sharp, like something inside her had been cut loose. Nolan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Aunt Lorraine looked down at her folded hands. Evan swore under his breath. And Erica turned to my mother with the oldest trick in her body. Mom, I didn't mean for it to become this. I was trying to keep things afloat. My mother stared at her. No rescue came. No hand reached. No script arrived. So Erica said the next thing. I did it for us. That was when I spoke again. No, I said. You did it so you could keep looking successful without telling the truth about your life. Silence. Then, for the first time all morning, Nolan spoke. What else don't I know? He didn't look at me. He looked straight at his wife. Erica said nothing. Nolan stood up, pushed his chair in carefully, and walked into the kitchen. We could hear the faucet running, then cabinet doors, then nothing. I thought, there goes another illusion to die privately. My mother looked older in those 10 minutes than she had in the previous 10 years. Not weak, just stripped. She kept reading and rereading the altered clause, tracing the differences between the pages like she could touch her way backward into innocence. Finally she whispered, I thought you were helping. Erica began to answer. My father said, Don't. So she didn't. Then my mother turned her head toward me, slowly, like the motion itself hurt. Did you know all this before Easter? Yes. Before Mother's Day? Yes. And you said nothing? I held her gaze. I said nothing because every time I raised concern before I had proof, you called it jealousy. That landed harder than any accusation I could have invented. Because it was true. Aunt Lorraine finally spoke. She raised concerns last fall. I did too. My mother looked at her sister-in-law with open shock. You knew? I knew enough to be worried. My father removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You let Erica run things because it was easier than learning them yourselves," I said quietly, "and because she looked like success to you." No one argued. That was how I knew it was the truest sentence in the room. I had written the next part by hand the night before. Not typed, not formal, just clear. A plan. Because exposing a fire is one thing. Deciding what survives it is another. I pulled the page from the folder and laid it between my parents. "This is what happens next," I said. My mother looked at it. My father didn't. He looked at me. "Read it." So I did. First, the altered authority is revoked today. Second, Judith assumes formal oversight of all active accounts until both of you choose otherwise. Third, a freeze is placed on discretionary movement and all private keys, codes, and passwords are changed by Monday. Fourth, Erica enters a written repayment structure and financial counseling within 30 days. Fifth, there will be no direct financial discussions between Erica and either parent without a third party present. Sixth, I am done serving as the quiet cleanup crew for lies I did not create. That last line wasn't administrative. It was for me. My mother read the page twice. My father asked Judith, "Can we do this?" Judith opened her black case. Yes. She had brought the forms already prepared. That was the thing about competent women. By the time everyone else is ready to admit there's a crisis, they've already printed tabs. My mother signed first. Her hand shook on the first signature and steadied by the second. My father signed next. He wrote slowly, heavily, as if the pen itself had weight. Then the room seemed to loosen and harden at the same time. A family can survive truth, but it never survives the version of itself that existed before the truth. That part dies, and it should. Then something happened I had not expected. My mother looked at me and said, "I owe you an apology." Not later, not privately, not wrapped in excuses. Right there, at the table, in front of everyone. I did not help her with it. I did not say it was okay. I did not rush in to make her feel better for finally doing the bare minimum. She swallowed and went on. "I let her mock you. I let myself believe ugly things about you because they were easier than admitting I had misjudged my own child. I am ashamed of that." My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. Across the table, Erica started crying again. This time not because she was caught, because she had just watched the center of gravity move away from her. That is a loss some people feel more sharply than consequences. She looked at me and said in a small, ragged voice, "You always hated me." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was lazy. "No," I said. "I got tired of carrying what you broke." She stared at me. Then she asked the saddest question of the day. "How am I supposed to come back from this?" I answered honestly. "You don't come back to what you were. You become someone else. If you're lucky, someone better." That room held still after that. No music, no dishes, no drifting summer noise from the backyard. Just breathing, and papers, and consequences settling into the wood grain of the table. The aftermath was not cinematic. Nobody fell to their knees. Nobody got disowned in a single dramatic sentence. Real family collapses are more administrative than that. Passwords changed, lawyers contacted, a counseling referral made, a lease reviewed, jewelry quietly sold, a second car returned. My father spent 2 straight weeks opening every envelope in the house himself. My mother called Judith 4 times in one day about direct deposit because she no longer trusted her own assumptions. Nolan moved into a short-term rental by the interstate. Evan flew back to Denver and started calling me every Sunday, not to discuss the disaster, but to keep some other rhythm alive. Aunt Lorraine dropped casseroles on my porch and never once said, "I told you so," which is how you know somebody truly loves you. As for Erica, she disappeared for nearly a month, except for emails sent through Judith. Brief, restrained, embarrassed in tone if not yet in character. She entered counseling, signed the first repayment acknowledgement, sold the designer dining room furniture, closed Blue Veil Holdings, and for the first time in her adult life, had to live without applause cushioning the fall. I did not contact her. That was part of the boundary. Love is not the same thing as access. My family had confused those two things for years. I wasn't doing that anymore. August came hot and bright, the kind of southern heat that makes porch railings warm to the touch after sunset. One Wednesday, my father came to my office with a small paper sack of peaches from a roadside stand. He sat in the chair across from my desk and looked around at my shelves, my printer, my neat stacks of files. "I never really saw how you built this place," he said. "It wasn't much. A 2-room office with old floors and bad parking. But it was mine." I said, "You never asked." He nodded. He didn't defend himself. That mattered. Then he said, "You were the one doing grown-up things while I was admiring whoever looked shiny." That was as close to a full self-indictment as my father was likely to get. I accepted it. Not because it fixed anything, because accuracy is a form of respect. He left the peaches. He came back the next week with coffee. After that, Wednesday became our day. Not every week. Enough. My mother started calling too. Short calls, practical questions, insurance forms, contractors, whether I thought a refinance offer looked predatory. Once she asked if I wanted to come by for pie. I said no, not yet. Healing is not a performance either. It arrives by schedule you can survive, not by the one everybody else finds photogenic. In early September, I drove out to my parents' house one evening when no one was home. My mother had given me permission to use the key again. That detail mattered. I carried one folding chair to the back deck, one glass, one bottle of white wine I had been saving for nothing in particular. The yard was quiet. The string lights over the railing had not been turned on. Crickets were starting up in the grass. I poured a single glass and sat where my sister had stood that 4th of July. Same deck boards, same railing, same yard, different woman. I thought about that toast, about the moment before I answered her, about all the years before that moment when I had swallowed truth to keep peace that never actually included me. And I realized something simple. My sister had mistaken my silence for inferiority. My parents had mistaken my steadiness for availability, and I had mistaken endurance for love. All 3 mistakes ended that summer. The sky went orange over the trees. A dog barked somewhere down the road. I lifted my glass. Not to Erica, not to my mother, not even to the version of me that had finally spoken. I lifted it to the woman who had been counting quietly all those months. The woman nobody in my family thought was paying attention. The woman my grandmother had once trusted with her last envelope. I took a slow sip, and for the first time in years, the future did not feel like something I was bracing against. It felt like a room I had finally unlocked. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more stories like this one. Stories about women who stop accepting the role they were assigned and start telling the truth in full sentences. And if you've ever been the one person in a family who saw the leak before the ceiling came down, tell me in the comments. What was the first truth you said out loud that changed everything? I read every one. And yes, that night on the deck,